So my beautiful friend Hayley at the Villainous Reader on Instagram, go check her out. She's absolutely amazing. But she has requested a horror books recommendation video. So I've got you covered. Disclaimer, I personally do not consider all of these books on this list horror. However, if it counted on the list that I found on Goodreads, then it made the cut, because something I don't consider horror, other people clearly do consider horror. So I've added it anyway, and even if it doesn't particularly count as a horror to me, they all have horrific themes or something horrific about the book, whether it be psychologically, physically, whatever. So the first book I'd like to recommend is Cold Moon Over Babylon by Mique, and look how cool this cover is. I read this for Jordaline of Jordaline Reads Patreon book club pick. Also go check her out, I'll link her down below. And I went into this one not expecting to enjoy it. I had never heard of it before, but I just thought, oh, I don't know. But it was a great read. So the plot of this one, it opens up and there's a little girl called Margaret. And one day in the very beginning, Margaret's riding her bike over this bridge, and then Margaret gets got. R.I.P. Margaret. But then Margaret is like, absolutely not. I'm going to haunt your ass. So the rest of the book, we're trying to figure out who was involved in the murder of Margaret, and it's all about seeing whether they get their comeuppance. This next recommendation is The Clown Hunt by Judith Sonnet. Just look how stunning this cover is. This is an extreme horror. This is grim, it's depraved, it made me feel physically sick, and it was a great time. So basically, the plot in this one, at the very beginning, there's a horrific murder committed by a serial killer clown, and that's just the opening scene. And then the plot of this is the people of the town have had enough of this. They wrangle up all the people dressed as clowns in the town, and they put them in a forest, and they basically want to hunt them down, hence Clown Hunt. The issue is that the people they've wrangled up dressed as clowns are innocent people, literally dressed as a clown for a birthday party, fancy dress party, etc. They're not serial killer clowns. So it blurs the lines of who's the bad guy and who's the good guy. It's only teeny tiny book, but absolutely gripping, feels quite long. Am I recommending you read it? Absolutely not. I'm not going to pay for your therapy. However, it has made the list. Just popping in to say that I forgot to say that I got this book recommendation from Mique of Mique Vlogs. I'll also link him down below. If you love horror or extreme horror, he's the guy to go to for recommendations. This next book I feel like is a YouTube fave, but it still has to be on the list because it's one of my favourites. Bunny by Mona Wad. This is a book that I personally feel is better on the reread, because the first read is very much I don't have a clue what's happening, which is why I'm not giving you a sense of the plot. I'm not going to give you a summary because this book is better to go in blind. But the first read, you're very much what the hell is happening, I don't have a clue, right up until the very end. And then when you reread it, you start to see all the clever things Mona Wad did and see the little Easter eggs and the foreshadowing and how clever the writing is. So recommend this, but you must reread it. Next, The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. I have the ugly cover. I desperately want the green cover because the yellow and the red just isn't vibing with me. Another book that I think you should go in completely blind. I think I personally need to reread this one. but I just remember absolutely loving it. I think this one's more of a hit and miss. You either love it or you don't like it, but still highly recommend. House of Hollow by Crystal Sutherland. Another stunning cover. All these horror books get really beautiful covers. So there's three sisters. When they were younger, something happened to them and they have no memory of what happened. And one day, one of the sisters goes missing. So the other two sisters for this book are trying to track down their sister, trying to find out what happened. And in the meantime, they realise that it could be linked to what happened to them when they were younger. And it's about tying all that in. Another quite short one, but a great ride. So this next recommendation, I do not own a physical copy of. I read it on my Kindle, so I have the Kindle copy. But that is The Girl Next Door by Jack Ketchum. This book is particularly horrific. It is based or inspired by the true story of Sylvia Likens, which is an absolutely horrific case. I encourage you to go and actually, if you don't already know, research the case, because she deserves for it to be known about. And this book it's not a glamorization of the case. It is literally the brutal what happened, and I think it's a very not only good read, but a really important read to get the case out there and share understanding of it. This next book, I wouldn't particularly call a horror, but it was on the list, so I'm going to add it, and it is horrific. But that is American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. This one I read in sixth form, which was quite a long time ago, so I don't quite remember a lot of it, but there are some scenes that have really stuck with me and I have never forgotten. I don't know if everyone knows what this is about, because it is also a very popular film, but this is about Patrick Bateman, who is a really rich, successful businessman, and he basically goes around having sex with women and murdering them, and murdering a few other people along the way. And it's how he gets away with it, with his charm, and how if you are rich and of a high status, you can get away with things a lot easier. This next recommendation, same deal. I read it in sixth form. I did A-level English literature, so it was one of the books we had to study, and that was A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. You can tell I studied it because I have annotations all throughout the book. Now, this one, as you can see from the cover, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a horror, but once again, horrific content. This follows this 15-year-old boy called Alex, and he goes around smashing up places, causing fights. He's not a top kid, but one day I think he gets arrested and he is then put into, I don't know if that's what it's called in here, but it is basically a conversion kind of camp place, and they subject him to horrific things. There's a hint on the cover as to what they do to him, and I think the hint is in the conversion camp kind of description. And once again, it's a kind of book that is rude. Who is the bad guy? Is it Alex, who is a reckless teen, or is it the people trying to make him a better person but using questionable means? I will say this book is quite a difficult read to begin with, because Alex's gang do use up like a made-up slang, so you do have to figure out what they're actually saying, but once you get to grips with it, it's actually quite a fun book, really. So my next recommendation would be House of Hunger by Alexis Henderson. I've seen a lot of mixed reviews on this one. I think a lot of people were quite disappointed with this one, but I absolutely loved it. So this one is about a lady called Marion, and she is living in complete poverty. She's living with an abusive brother, and she just wants an escape. And the highest paying job in this world is to be a blood maid. So she applies to go be a blood maid for the House of Hunger, and this is run by Countess Lisavette. And basically Marianne discovers different things about the house that makes it seem a bit more sinister, and then as the book goes on she finds out what's actually going on in the house, and it's horrifying. This next one I've just got finished with. I read it once again for Jordaline's Reads Patreon book club pick, and it's also going to be the April pick for Katie of Katie Colson. Again, I've already said amazing. So that's Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. I personally didn't find this one too horrific, but I know some people would. Once again, I don't need to say how stunning the cover is. There is another cover which is despicably ugly compared to this one. Don't know why they did another one. This is the supreme cover, of course. So this is about Mique, whose wife Leah has just returned from her sea voyage, but when she's come back she's not acting herself. She's spending a lot of time in the bath, which obviously is suspicious considering she was on a sea voyage, and she won't talk about what happened while she was away. She was only meant to go for a short while, but she ended up being gone for years. And it's just unfolding what did happen on that voyage and what is wrong with her wife. Is she okay? What's going on? My next recommendation would be Just Like Mother by Anne Hetzel. Another creepy cover. So this one is about Maeve, who, when she was younger with her cousin Andrea, they were raised in a cult, and then they escaped the cult, and then they don't have any contact, and then years later Andrea, the cousin, gets in contact with Maeve and asks her to go stay with her. But then creepy things start happening at Andrea's house. She starts asking Maeve inappropriate questions, and it's just trying to figure out, did Andrea actually leave the cult, or is there still ties there? Tender is the Flesh by Augustina Bastarrica. This one I personally really appreciate. This is basically a virus infects all of the animals, so their meat becomes inconsumable by humans. So the government's solution, rather than everyone just don't eat meat, is let's eat humans. Let's farm humans and sell their meat as special meat. And yeah, so I find this one particularly horrific because you know this would actually happen. If anything like that occurred, you couldn't have meat. Rather than doing the simple option of not eating it, this would happen because the world is horrific. My next recommendation, I think I flew through in one day, maybe two. Mary by Nat Cassidy. This was quite popular last year. As you can see, I've tabbed it, and it's a real floppy book. So the lead character, Mary, has something going on where she can't look at herself in the mirror. When she looks at young ladies, their faces are all distorted, and she wants to know what's happening, what's wrong, and all the doctors are just going, it's menopause, you're fine. And this is just about her figuring out what's wrong. There was also a horrific murder in the past where a woman did get bludgeoned and her face was destroyed. So it's revealing, are there any links to that? Top tier read. This next one is one of my favourite books and films of all time, and I actually buddy read this with Hayley herself, so she does not need this recommendation, but other people might want it. And that is Battle Royale by Kushin Takami. This I absolutely adore. I've loved it for years and years and years. The tabbing system, all those reds, is every time someone dies. So this is basically the government of Japan wants to sort out the delinquent children. They want to sort out the youth and make them behave. So every year they choose a random class from a school, and the class gets gassed, they get kidnapped, and they enter this battle royale. So they are all given a bag where they have like a map of where they are landing. They get, I think, water, and then they get a random weapon. And the weapon can be anything from a machete to a spoon. So your odds are completely random with what is given in your bag. And the aim of the game is you are to fight to the death until there is one student left. But you have 3 days, and if there is not one student standing by the end of the 3 days, and there are not more students still alive, they have a collar on their neck, and that will explode, killing everyone. So you have to play the game. This year's game is particularly interesting because for drama, they've decided to include 2 extra contestants in the game outside of the class, and they are a previous winner of the game and a complete psychopath. And then finally, another booktube darling, The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. I think multiple people love this book. I only recently read it. Didn't love it as much as everyone else did, I don't think. I gave it a solid 4 stars. Still a solid book, but just not a winner for me. So in this one, as the title would suggest, there is a book club, and they've decided that they are bored of what they are reading. So they start to read more crime novels to spice up their boring lives. And one day, a mysterious man moves into the town, and they are suspicious of him. And some of the ladies think the other ladies are just being influenced by the crime books, and the others are convinced that there is something wrong with him. Now, this man, as you can probably guess from the title, is a vampire. So we just follow how that unfolds and what happens with that. So I hope you enjoy these recommendations. Did my best. If you want to see any more recommendations, please let me know. Bye-bye.